All right, so we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today, huh? Puff Daddy.
Yeah, definitely a story that goes way beyond the headlines.
Right, like sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping. We see his name and we think parties, music, but this is something else entirely. So how do we even begin to unpack this?
Carefully. I think the key here is to, like you said, look beyond those initial reactions and try to understand the context. And a big part of that is hearing from those who were closest to him, those who might have witnessed or experienced things firsthand.
Okay, so let's do that. This Europa FM article, for instance, it talks about these parties Puff Daddy was known for, freak-off parties and white parties, they're calling them. They paint a pretty wild picture.
Yeah, and it's interesting the article highlights how these white parties seem to be tied to Labor Day, almost like an annual tradition. That kind of consistency, it suggests a certain culture, a pattern of behavior.
And it wasn't just like a small group of friends either, right? I mean, we're talking J-Lo, Leo DiCaprio, Paris Hilton, the list goes on.
Exactly, and that's where it gets tricky. Because while attending a party doesn't mean you endorse everything that might be going on, it does raise questions about the environment and how those in proximity to power navigate those situations.
Yeah, talk about being caught in a tough spot. And speaking of navigating power dynamics, you know who comes to mind? Ashton Kutcher.
Right, because he and Puff Daddy go way back to their MTV days. And that's what makes his recent comments about Puff Daddy so interesting. Remember that Hot Ones interview?
Yeah, where he was like, there are many things I can't talk about.
Exactly. Very cryptic. Makes you wonder what he knows and what might be preventing him from speaking more openly. Although I did see that Page 6 article saying he's not part of the investigation, so who knows what's going on there.
Yeah, could be a lot of reasons for his silence. But then you have someone like Usher who actually lived with Puff Daddy as a teenager.
And that's different. That's firsthand experience, not just hearsay. And what he describes is, well, it's unsettling, to say the least.
Yeah, he talks about orgies, a constant flow of women. It's a lot, especially considering he was so young at the time.
And what's really striking is that later on, Usher said he wouldn't let his own children stay with Puff Daddy. That's a huge statement, a clear indication that whatever he experienced had a real impact on him.
It makes you wonder if those closest to him are expressing these kinds of reservations, what else might be going on behind closed doors? And not everyone is distancing themselves either, right? Like Ray J, he actually came out in support of Puff Daddy, said he was surprised by the allegations and thinks we should all just, learn from the situation.
Which speaks to the complexities of these relationships, the loyalty that exists within these circles, even when faced with such serious accusations. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, for sure. And then you have 50 Cent, who has his own history with Puff Daddy. No love lost there. Now he's saying that other rappers are staying silent because they're afraid of incriminating themselves. He even suggested someone make a documentary about it.
And that's where this goes beyond individual opinions, right? If he's right, then we're talking about a potential system of fear and silence within the entire music industry.
I mean, that's a scary thought. Are we talking about a whole culture of looking the other way because speaking out could cost you your career?
Right. It makes you wonder how many people might have information but are too afraid to come forward. And what does that say about the industry as a whole?
It's giving major #MeToo vibes, isn't it? Like we saw this in Hollywood, this reckoning with abuse of power. Could this be the music industry's turn?
Possibly. And if that's the case, then what are the implications? Will this lead to real change? More accountability for those in power? Or will it fade away without any real consequences?
Big questions. I'm curious, from your perspective, seeing all these different reactions and opinions, what stands out to you the most?
It's hard to ignore the contrast, You have someone like Usher, who experienced that world firsthand and now expresses serious reservations. And then you have Ray J still pledging his support for Puff Daddy. It just shows how complicated these relationships are. How do you even begin to unravel that?
Yeah, it's not as simple as picking a side. And then you have 50 Cent basically saying there's a cover-up happening, that the whole system is designed to protect the powerful.
Which, if true, is incredibly disturbing. It suggests a level of complicity, whether intentional or not, that allows these kinds of things to continue.
So where do we even go from here? How do we make sense of all this?
I think it comes down to being critical thinkers.
Uh-huh.
We can't just take everything at face value, especially in a situation like this where there's so many conflicting accounts. There are always layers, power dynamics at play that influence what's said and what's left unsaid.
It's almost like we're at this tipping point, not just for Puff Daddy, but for the music industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. A real moment of reckoning. And maybe it's a tipping point for us too. the fans, the listeners.
What do you mean? How so?
Well, we like to think we can separate the art from the artist, right? But what happens when those lines get blurred? When the accusations are so serious, so systemic, that you can't just ignore them?
So you're saying we have a responsibility here as consumers?
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
we can't just turn a blind eye to everything that happens behind the scenes. We have to at least consider the possibility that, our enjoyment, our support could be contributing to a harmful system.
That's a lot to sit with. But you're right, we can't just pretend these things aren't happening.
Right. And maybe it starts by asking more questions, demanding more transparency from the industry. Because these whispers, these rumors, they've been around for a long time.
Yeah, and it feels different now, like people are finally starting to listen.
And hopefully speak up. Because real change, lasting change, that only happens when we all find the courage to say something, right? To hold each other accountable.
Powerful stuff. Well, folks, as the story develops, as more information comes to light, let's all try to keep that in mind. Let's keep listening, keep asking the tough questions, and who knows, maybe, just maybe, we'll start to see some real change. That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging deeper.